Western leaders say that there is no evidence that Russia is withdrawing its troops from Ukraine's border and that the threat of invasion remains high. Well, on Tuesday, the Kremlin said its soldiers were pulling back and returning to their bases. The NATO Defence Alliance, however, doesn't believe it. Here's NATO's Secretary General.
We do not know what will happen in Ukraine, but the situation has already demonstrated we face a crisis in European security. Moscow has made it clear that it is prepared to contest the fundamental principles that have underpinned our security for decades, and to do so by using force. I regret to say that this is the new normal in Europe.
Now, Jens Stoltenberg isn't alone. This is the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken.
We continue to see not only these forces massed, we continue to see critical units moving toward the border, not away from the border. So what we need to see is exactly the opposite. We need to see these forces moving away. We've heard what the Kremlin said about this. As President Biden said yesterday, we'd welcome that, but we haven't seen it on the ground. And the bottom line is this: we're prepared either way. We're prepared to engage in diplomacy with Russia. If it's serious about it, we're also prepared for renewed Russian aggression.
So that is the US saying that Russian tanks are moving towards Ukraine's border, not away from it. And the context to this, well, these are pictures released by the Russian Defense Ministry. They're said to show military equipment withdrawing from Crimea, which was seized by Russia back in 2014. Now, in another development, Ukraine's Defense Ministry and 2 Ukrainian banks have been hit by a cyber attack. Here's the warning from the White House press secretary.
And I would note again, as I said yesterday, we've been warning for months, both publicly and privately in our engagements with the Ukrainians and the Europeans, that the potential for Russia to conduct cyber operations in Ukraine is part of their playbook as well. So we're particularly concerned, but we don't have anything new in terms of specific attribution.
Now, Russia, however, remains adamant that it is not posing any threat to Ukraine. Here's Russia's Deputy Ambassador to the United Nations speaking to the BBC.
President Zelensky himself mentioned that there was similar placement of troops a year ago, and there was absolutely no hysteria about it. It happened before. This is our territory, and this is our troops. When you say placement of troops at the border, it does mean that they are standing at the border. They are in their bases. Sometimes the number of troops in bases increases, sometimes decreases. This is normal process for every country, not only Russia. So why such a hysteria this time? So this is absolutely artificial hype, artificial problem. And those who escalated this problem should de-escalate. And it's not Russia who did so.
Well, throughout all of this, the push for a diplomatic solution to this crisis continues. President Biden and the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz will be speaking on the phone in around the next half hour. And NATO defence ministers have been meeting in Brussels. This is the traditional family photo that we often see at these types of gatherings. The Latvian defence minister was there. He's also been speaking to the BBC.
Putin is using, and in general, Russian diplomats are using their language about provocations and other things very masterfully. They are using this without any limitation in order simply to make the West do nothing for their own protection, because there will be always voices among the Western country societies telling, look, we don't need to do anything because that might provoke Russia.
Now, at the centre of all of this is Ukraine's desire to join NATO, the defensive alliance, and Russia's opposition to that. If you have a look at NATO's expansion, it shows just why Russia is so concerned. Russia already shares a small part of its border with NATO countries. If Ukraine were to join, it would increase the number of countries in the alliance on Russia's borders. But for many member states, Russia's demand to bar Ukraine from joining is non-negotiable. This is the spokesperson for the Polish foreign minister.
We have to stop the aggression, and that's what we try to do in the next few weeks. It's impossible to make any compromise on the issue of future membership of anyone with someone who is outside the pact.
Well, let's get analysis from our Moscow correspondent, Caroline Davies.
I've been listening in across Maria Zakharova, who is one of the foreign minister's spokespeople, talking about the situation, and I was able to ask her a question about whether or not there was a room for negotiation if NATO, given that NATO has said that they are going to keep their open door policy, this idea that other countries could in theory join NATO, was there room for discussion? This has been the key point that's been really thorny for both sides to make any movement on. And in response, Maria Zakharova did say that they were open to these discussions, that they wanted to have serious discussions, but where they're going to find that common ground, we keep coming back to this point, very difficult to say.
So that's the diplomacy, the discussions. Now, you'll recall that today, Wednesday, was the day that the United States has warned that we may indeed see a Russian invasion. No sign of that yet. Just have a look at the scene in the capital, Kiev, earlier, where Ukrainians have marked a day of unity. The president asking Ukrainians to fly the national flag and also to sing the national anthem together. Also in Ukraine, the army has been holding drills. These images show troops firing anti-tank launchers, which were delivered by Britain. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been on a whirlwind tour of the country, appealing for calm, and he's been speaking to the BBC's Sarah Rainsford.
To be honest, we react to the reality we have, and we don't see any withdrawal yet. We just heard about it. I think all normal people expect de-escalation. As for the threat, I've said many times before that we are calm about any threats because we remember that this did not start yesterday. This has been happening for many years because we see it. That's it. When the troops do withdraw, everyone will see that. Not only reconnaissance or the military, we'll all see it. But for now, it's just statements.
So Volodymyr Zelensky there touring the country. Let's return to the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, to get more analysis from our diplomatic correspondent, Paul Adams.
A lot of us started to fixate on Wednesday because the Americans at one point were briefing that an attack could happen as early as today. In the last couple of days, Western officials have been saying, look, don't get too fixated on particular days. The point they're making is that around now, the Russians have been capable of launching an attack. They have all the assets that they need. Everything is ready to go. All that's missing is the order from Vladimir Putin. Now, that remains the same today. It'll remain the same tomorrow. It'll remain the same next week, unless we see some really significant departure of Russian troops from around Ukraine's borders. As for Unity Day, well, it was a fairly low-key affair, it has to be said. There was a big flag being paraded in the Olympic Stadium, another one over in Maidan Square, off to my left here. Buildings over in the high-rise area, I'm looking at them right now, illuminated in the colors of the Ukrainian flag. But it was not a public holiday. People were going about their business. There were flags on the streets. The national anthem was sung at 10 o'clock. But for the most part, the people of Kiev carried on doing what they've been doing throughout this crisis, which is living their lives.
Well, as they continue living their lives, when it comes to NATO, they say that they see no evidence of de-escalation from the Russian side.
That's right. I think, we have to recognize what's going on here. This is theater. The Russians have been pumping out pictures, first of all, showing the build-up, and now showing the apparent withdrawal of forces. This is all messaging. They wanted the West to believe that there was a real threat building up there, even though they continue to say they have no intentions of attacking Ukraine. Now they want to present a slightly different image, which is that they are reducing their forces and saying, as they did say, some time ago, that these exercises would end and troops would go home afterwards. But it is theater. And the Ukrainians are not averse to doing this too. They put out some pictures today showing their Air Force with the Ukrainian flag very visible in the front of the cockpit. Everyone's doing it, and it's all to send messages all the time.
And Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, is sending a message as well, a potential new battle groupings within Eastern Europe. Just talk us through the likelihood of that.
So this is happening. What Jens Stoltenberg is saying essentially is, and he said it pretty much in these words the other day, is if Russia it continues this aggression as NATO sees it, you will not get less NATO in your neighborhood, you will get more NATO. on the so-called eastern flank.